Canadian junior hockey has been rocked by another sexual assault allegation. A Radio-Canada investigation has linked it to a team in Quebec. One of those accused of being involved is the son of a former NHL player. The CBC's Alison Northcott has the details from Montreal.
Well, this goes back to an alleged incident in Drummondville, Quebec in 2016, which was first reported this morning by our colleagues at Radio-Canada. They obtained court documents about the alleged sexual assault of a 15-year-old girl by 3 people, including 2 former members of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League team, the Voltigeurs de Drummondville. 2 of the alleged assailants were minors at the time, and they can't be identified. But the third, Noah Corson, who was named in court documents, was an adult and continues to play hockey in the minor leagues. So he is facing a charge of sexual assault, but the allegation against him has not been proven in court. In a statement to Radio-Canada, Corson's agent declined an interview request because he says his case is coming up in June, and the agent says Corson denies the allegation. We heard from the league, the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, and they said that they did not know about these allegations. Have a listen to what the league said.
Obviously, if we want to take actions, we need to be aware of the situation. Same for the team. If there's a criminal act that happened in one of our teams, we want to know. We want to take action. We want to suspend the player. We want to do an inquiry, and obviously, we want to participate to the procedure with the police and the justice as well. So for us, absolutely, we want to know.
So he says following other previous allegations involving players, the league launched a committee to put on a series of workshops for players to raise awareness about sexual violence and consent. And it says it will continue to give those workshops. It's also hoping to get some help and financing from the federal government to do that.
The CBC's Alison Northcott in Montreal. Today, parliamentarians heard from the man who conducted an independent review of Hockey Canada's leadership, and top of mind for those MPs learning more about the troubling findings he uncovered. Thomas Cromwell was also asked about the candidates nominated to sit on Hockey Canada's new board. The CBC's Sarah Galashan is following the story and joins us live. So Sarah, what did the judge say?
Well, he talked for about 2.5 hours answering questions from parliamentarians on that Heritage Committee. Questions about the 221-page report that he tabled shortly ago. And in that report, he made recommendations about what the new board should look like. He said that it should not be made up of more than 60% of one gender. And the slate that was made public yesterday, if you looked at it, of course, it follows those lines. 550 people applied to be part of the new Hockey Canada board, and of that, 9 were selected to be on a slate that still has to be voted upon this coming Saturday. Of the 9, 4 of them are men. 1 of them a retired judge who would be the board chair. The other 5 are women, and one of them a woman who Canadians be very familiar with, and that is Cassie Campbell-Pascal, a 3-time Olympian. 2 of those times to the Olympics, she won gold. Currently sitting on the board of Hockey Canada's foundation. She brings with her some serious hockey credentials here. When asked, though, about the slate of candidates that have been are being put forward for a vote this coming Saturday, Justice Cromwell had this to say.
I've had zero involvement in either the recruiting, selection, or nomination of candidates. And so I'm not close to the process. I certainly had no role to play in any selection aspect of their work. What I know about it is what I've read in the press, and all I can say is that it certainly appears that the nominating committee tried extremely hard to recruit the sort of board with the sort of profile that I recommended.
So it was not his job to get in there and actually make the change, but rather to look at the governing structure and to figure out what was wrong and make recommendations to that. And one of the things that he identified here was that there was a serious gap in policy framework in that pertaining to how funds were to be used and for what expenditures they could be used for, how to handle allegations of sexual assault. He agreed when asked that it was a failure not to have those policies in place, but he was clear that the previous board, which did step down in October after Canadians became very familiar with many of them following the summer of a number of controversial appearances before the Heritage Committee, he was clear that they were doing their best at the time that this was all happening, and that it's only with hindsight that it became clear that more robust governance, is the way he put it, is needed. Andrew?
And Sarah, what role does Thomas Cromwell think Sport Canada needs to play here?
He was reluctant to make any specific recommendations, saying that he had only 89 days, so he was not looking specifically at Sport Canada. Cooperation, though, would be the recommendation that he is making, cooperation on the part of all parties, and Sport Canada in particular. He did use that word, though, failure, and he was reluctant as well to assign any person to that failure or any entity to that failure, but NDP Peter Julian, after the Heritage Committee sat, he was quick to point out who he thinks the failure rests with. Take a listen.
The federal government needs to ensure that national sports organizations, all of them, not just Hockey Canada, all of the national sports organizations meet the bar of transparency and accountability. The federal government has failed in this regard, and I think the Justice Cromwell's report points very clearly to the obligation that the federal government has to ensure safety in Canadian sports for Canadian athletes and for the general public.
As I say, retired Justice Cromwell, he was loath to finger point, saying that finger pointing is not helpful. Rather, he believes that all entities, parties involved here need to cooperate if they are going to right this ship. Andrew?
Sarah, thank you. The CBC's Sarah Galashan. For more on Hockey Canada, we're joined by Taylor McKee. Taylor is an assistant professor of sports management at Brock University. And Taylor, thanks for joining us. I want to get back to the story that our colleagues at Radio Canada broke about a 15-year-old girl who was allegedly assaulted by 3 young men, 2 of whom were wearing the colors of the local junior major hockey team, the Drummondville Voltigeurs. What do you make of this accusation?
Certainly, it's so important in these instances not to simply lump these instances together as yet another data point, or say, well, what do we expect given what we know about the culture? It is important to be disturbed, as this is a disturbing incident. So I think, as a Canadian hockey public, as a Canadian public in general, I really do urge people not to just say, well, here's just another instance. Each and every instance that we come across needs to be treated severely. So this one, again, like the others that have lacked transparency in the past, demands swift and thorough investigation, and we must take these things seriously on their own merits and not just simply add them to a pile of growing cases about hockey culture.
And so what does that look like in your view? What should the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League do with these allegations, given everything that has happened with Hockey Canada?
Well, that's a good question. And certainly right now, we were dealing, certainly in the aftermath of this summer, we saw many provinces say that, our credibility and our trust in Hockey Canada has been eroded. Quebec was one of them that said, I don't know if we can trust Hockey Canada right now to deal with these matters. So first and foremost, cooperate fully and transparently with the police. I mean, if a police investigation is started, bring forward all resources that they can from the QMJHL's perspective and Hockey Canada as well. But this is an interesting test for the QMJHL and Hockey Quebec in general, because during the summer when they said that, look, we don't know if we can trust Hockey Canada to handle these matters seriously, well, here is an interesting test for them. Can they handle this matter swiftly on their own merits? And then for this new board, I mean, this is certainly a situation here. Well, again, this new board that is yet to be certified. But when they take a hold, you have to wonder from the perspective of this incoming Hockey Canada board, do they know necessarily what they're signing up for? How many more instances like this are around the corner from this is a recent event, let alone ones from the past? So certainly Quebec has an interesting test in front of them, but this incoming board shares that burden as well.
So as we've been talking about, former Supreme Court Justice Thomas Cromwell is testifying at the hearings probing Hockey Canada this week. Are there any major takeaways so far from what you've heard from him, and what will you be listening for?
Certainly, his reticence to assign blame is understandable. And I think that there is a thirst in the Canadian public for a scapegoat. And I think we can sort of rest at ease knowing that there's not going to be a single person said, well, this person did it, it's their fault, let's blame them, and let's sort of move on. The structural and the governance related recommendations that Cromwell made will take a little while to sort out, certainly. And I think that when he's making recommendations about the way that the board should be restructured and the makeup of the board, those are all important things. It's also important to note, though, that the problems that Hockey Canada got themselves into are not strictly governance related. They are exacerbated certainly by governance issues. But these were issues that were far deeper than just the composition of the board or necessarily about even on a policy front. So while we can look to external parties like Justice Cromwell to try and clean things up and build things forward moving forward, it's important to recognize what led to the situation as it is right now. And that's something that's, yes, it is governance related, and yes, it is policy related, but it is something much deeper, and sometimes it's harder to wrap our arms around.
So speaking of Hockey Canada more generally, it's named its slate of candidates to fill the 9 vacant positions on its board of directors for a 1-year term. What do you know about these candidates so far? Is this the right mix?
Well, certainly, again, it's very important to note that, again, this is only for a 1-year position, and once they're certified on the 14th, this is not the long-term future of Hockey Canada being decided right now. This is just for a 1-year sort of situation. Certainly, there are some very high-profile people on this list. Cassie Campbell Pascal being one of them, Justice Hugh Fraser Right Honorable Hugh Fraser being another. These are people that are lending a lot of their professional credibility to Hockey Canada. Now, that is not something that they are taking lightly. That's a precarious thing for them to do. As I just mentioned, I mean, do we know for sure, if you were on this board, could you know for certain that you know everything about what has happened in 2004, 2018? There's a lot of information that's likely still to come out. So in terms of the actual appointees themselves, Hugh Fraser is an absolutely fantastic choice as a board chair. His experience with dating back to the Dublin Inquiry in 1988 is something that I think is really interesting for Canadians here, because that was a moment as well when we looked at sporting culture and we said that this is a really, really, really important moment for Canadian sport. And this is being doping in 1988 after Ben Johnson's positive test in the 1988 Seoul Summer Olympics. It was a moment in which a lot of people said, look, this doping in sport is endemic. It's everywhere. It's impossible to get out. The Dublin Inquiry taught us that, it takes a lot of pain and some desperately compelled for transparency, but culture can be changed if there is enough of an appetite. So his experience in that regard, let alone his experience as an athlete in many other fields, lends him well as a board chairperson. As for the rest of the board, again, their experience varies wildly. There is not necessarily someone with a specific expertise in dealing with sexual assault victims. That would be something I think we'd like to look for, not just for this 1 year, but as a part of the permanent architecture of Hockey Canada. But again, certainly still a wait-and-see approach, and 1 year is not a very long time.
Taylor, thank you. That's Taylor McKee, an assistant professor of sports management at Brock University.